Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Alien Familiar RPG Podcast. I am Clayton.
I'm Jordan.
Kyle Perkins here.
And before we get started, you can find show notes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. We are on Facebook at facebook.com/alienfamiliarmedia. And if you would like to help us out with hosting costs, you can do so at patreon.com/alienfamiliarmedia, where if you enjoy our content, please, any help you would be able to give us would be greatly appreciated. Our topic that we are going to be talking about today is we're going to be talking about some bad behaviors of players and GMs, how they can impact the game, and what can be done to change them if you realize that you are a player or a game master who has one of these problem behaviors that can drag the game down. I think that there's a fine line sometimes between good behavior and bad behavior, especially when we're talking about these games that we love, and that each person who comes to the table is going to have a different idea of what is fun and what isn't fun. I would say that like some of the traits that we're going to talk about are, in the past we've talked about some traits that are good for players to have. This time we're going to be talking about like bad behaviors, and a lot of times it seems to me like the bad behaviors are just good behaviors that are taken to some sort of an extreme. A good behavior might be doing something in moderation, whereas a bad behavior might be doing it way too much or not at all.
I have a question, Clayton. Looking at your list here, you got 7 bad behaviors for players, but only 5 bad behaviors for GMs. Do you think players are more prone to bad behavior than GMs are?
Well, I would say that I've most often seen it in players because I have seen more players in my time as game master, or as a role player. I've seen a lot more players than I have seen GMs. I've seen probably 4 times as many players as I've seen GMs.
On average, yeah.
So I'm going to try to be open and honest with what we talk about, and I will admit whenever I feel like it's something that I have committed myself. Either I've committed it in the past, or some of these I'm going to be reluctant to say that I still do these. Hopefully, like I've recognized that I'm trying to change some of these behaviors. So of the things that I have here that I want to talk about basically 3 aspects of each one of these problem behaviors. I want to talk about what the behavior is, kind of give a definition of what this behavior is. I want to explain why it is a problem, and then talk about how to change it or modify it in a way that can become a positive behavior or a positive trait that players have. The first one that I have on my list is metagaming. And this was the first one that I came up with, and it is something that when it's done in the right amounts, it can help the game. But if it's done in the wrong amounts, it can hurt the game. And I don't know if I have a good definition of what is a good amount and what is a bad amount.
Let's start with the definition of metagaming then, and then we can figure out quantities.
So I would say that metagaming is using the fact that you are playing in a game and using that knowledge in a way that influences the game itself. The easiest way I could describe it would be that usually metagaming comes down to decisions that are made by the player and the character. A metagame decision is most often like a player has information that their character doesn't have, and then the character acts upon that information.
So it's a mismatch between what your character would do given only that person's subjective knowledge versus what you know from your bird's eye view of the structure of the game, the physics of the world represented by rules and so on.
Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate, I think. I think you could also define it as a sort of failure to role play in a way, because if you are acting on information that you, the real person, the real human being, has, and not acting in a way that your character would act because of that information, you've stopped role playing. You've ceased to role play at that point.
Do we have any examples?
Well, I want to kind of tackle what Kyle just said a little bit. Like, I see metagaming as something that can help the game in certain amounts, just as much as it can hurt a game. So, like where you were talking about, like if a player is acting on something that that their character wouldn't know, that can propel a game forward. Because whenever we're playing a game, we are not seeing every moment of a particular character's life. We're only seeing snapshots like we do in a movie. Granted, in a book or a movie, in a book we're seeing a lot more of those than what we're seeing in a movie. And a game is kind of, I would say, more like a book where you're seeing more of the minutia of a character's life. But even in a game and in a book, there's going to be things that you just don't go over during a session. Like realistically, how many times have you seen a character or read a character in a book stepping aside to go use the bathroom? And how many times has that been something that has happened in a game?
Right.
Only if you're going to go and do something else. you lie to everybody and you say, I gotta go take a leak, and then you go and murder somebody in an alleyway. I don't know.
I have made players, or like had a thing happen in a situation to a player, like if they're on a night shift and I roll some kind of encounter for them, I say, okay, it's 3 a.m. or whatever, you're the guy up for guard, you go to take a leak, and then you hear something in the woods, or, feel a dagger on your throat, whatever, as just like flavor to the thing. But yeah, you're right, there's a ton of stuff that is, like, abstracted out of the day-to-day for your characters' lives. But like,
so let me tie this into metagaming.
Mm-hmm.
In a metagame situation, where a character, let's say that there is a secret that is being held by one particular player character, and that player character is the only one in the group who knows that secret.
Mm-hmm.
Metagame, everybody is aware that there is a secret. They might not be aware what exactly the nature of the secret is, but somehow the players sitting around the table have caught wind that this player has a secret.
Mm-hmm.
I see there's 2 different metagame ways you can handle this situation. One of which I would say is a good example of metagaming, and another I would say is a bad example of metagaming. I would say a good example of metagaming would, I'm sorry, let me explain the bad example first, and then I'll explain the good. The bad example of metagaming would be, you say in character, okay, my character corners the other character and starts to roll a bunch of insight checks on them. I want to start looking at their, I want to start looking for clues that would give me ideas of what is up. And then I want to grill this character on where they were last night. Why weren't they with the rest of the group whenever we were out on the town? Where exactly were they? If normally the group splits up and that character is always off on their own, what's the metagame reason what's the in-character reason why suddenly you're so suspicious of that character? I would say that is an example of bad metagaming.
Mm-hmm.
I think a pretty common one too, like stuff like that, especially dealing with all of a sudden not trusting another player because you, the human being, know that human being just did something shady, but your character would have no reason to suspect it. That happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something I've done myself, because whenever we're sitting around the table, I forget sometimes the things that my character knows and that I don't know, or the things that exactly like I said. And Jordan, I know that you try to, your tactic of handling this is to try to make sure that you don't metagame by just not knowing the meta knowledge.
Yeah, if somebody doesn't want me to know a fucking thing in character, I will step away or whatever the fuck. I don't want to know. My memory is dog shit. And there's no way 3 weeks from now I'm going to remember, oh, that's just a thing I heard, or, oh, that was a thing I actually saw in character. Like, I just don't want to have to, I don't have the cognitive bandwidth for it.
So I think a positive metagame way of dealing with this issue where the players know that that a PC has a secret, but the other PCs do not. I would say that you start having some conversations related to the topic in character. For instance, let's say that the secret that was gained by the one player had something to do with one of the enemies. I think it is entirely within the scope of a story that from time to time the player characters would kind of discuss the shit that's going on and why the bad guys are doing what they're doing, how they can combat the bad guys. I think bringing up an in-character discussion about this topic in and of itself wouldn't be considered a bad form of metagaming, because it's highlighting something that your characters are probably doing anyway, and it's probably happening during the off-camera times, like whenever you're setting up camp for the night, or anytime you have just a stretch of time where you're not doing anything. Characters are going to shoot the shit. Mm-hmm. It's what we do in real life. So trying to guide it in a way that whenever you are shooting the shit, it gives the opportunity for the player who has the secret to then divulge that secret.
There's a weird balance that pops up now and then. It happened the other night in your Ebron game. It's part of the schizophrenic nature of a game like this, where you're pretending to be another person for part of it. Where we were having a discussion about what we were going to do as a group, and since it was so early and it was the first time we had, free reign to just wander around Sharn, we sort of simultaneously were having an in-character conversation as people who had just met each other and had gone through, a brief, odd event where we had worked together. But then we're also trying to have the meta conversation as people of what we wanted to do with the rest of this campaign as a game that we were playing together. And it's really tough to split that up. At least I couldn't figure out how to do it, because you don't get very far into the conversation about one aspect of it until you brush up into something relevant to the other aspect of it. The experience of the game versus the subjective perspective and motives of characters. It's tough. I don't have a good answer for how to deal with that.
I think that in hindsight, what I should have done the other night was I probably should have cut the in-character discussions off a little bit earlier than what I did, and had a conversation that was entirely meta between the players, saying, okay, your characters are all, like, just kind of establishing a baseline between the characters of, okay, so does it seem like you guys are going to be working together? Is that something that your characters are having had this shared experience of fighting this monster on the lightning rail? Are you going to see the other player characters as people that you would turn to in the future whenever you need help with a problem? Because what I'm ending up going to be doing is, before the next session that we have next Thursday, I'm going to be talking individually with each player and kind of giving them some adventure seeds and basically giving them problems that they can then say, well, I don't have the resources to take care of this by myself. I know some other people who are just as new in this city as I am, who I think I could get along with and would work well with helping me achieve these goals.
Yeah, that's what I figured you were going to do. That's good. But yeah, I think that stuff comes up a lot, and I don't know what the where the place to split those conversations is. Like, when people talk about metagaming, it's almost like there's an assumed priority for the subjective experience of the character, something like, for the sanctity of the narrative or something like that. There's some kind of priority put on playing from the character's perspective, but that only goes so far, because at some point you're going to have to acknowledge the system that you're playing in. Like, let's say I was playing a barbarian in a group, and I had a buddy in the group who was a rogue, and there was a third player in the group that was a cleric, and we got into a fight with some monsters and got really fucked up. The cleric blew through all their healing spells. I saw the cleric healing people. At some point, the rogue gets clobbered by something and dies, and then I'm a barbarian who's pissed off that the cleric just decided not to heal my buddy. Am I gonna fucking rage out and rip the cleric's head off? Like, somewhere in there you have to be like, well, there's rules and there's limits to, what things can do, and there's all sorts of concessions that we make, going both directions.
Yeah, and in your example, like the metagame of the barbarian knowing, okay, there's only so much healing that a character can do, that can help the game with keeping, for instance, a very vicious in-character fight from breaking out just because of the way the rules work.
Well, I think in general, knowing how the rules work and knowing how investigations in role-playing games usually work, those elements of metagaming can help. It will help progress things, it will help move the plot or story forward, it will help in avoiding useless conversations. You don't want the cleric every single damn time to have to be like, in his character's voice, "Oh yeah, I was out of magical mana. I was so tired I couldn't heal your friend. My god," like, come on, you don't need that. We get it. You have a limited number of spells.
After the first time, it just becomes another one of those assumed off-camera things that happen, where it's not something that has to be on the forefront, but all the players can understand, yes, in some way, like, the cleric and the wizard are letting the other players know, I'm getting depleted. I can't cast Fireball anymore. I can't cast Cure Wounds anymore. And in that way, I kind of feel like there's a lot of metagaming that is just as important for maintaining the flow of the game as, Jordan, you were talking about the sanctity of keeping a character's knowledge separate from, or keeping the knowledge that a character knows strictly to what they would actually know and not acting on any information that is outside of it. There's also, I would say, just as sacrosanct an agreement, a social agreement between all the players at the table that, hey, we are getting together here to play a game. We are playing this game together, and I sometimes feel that there is a break in metagame, in that metagame social contract, if there is always a player who just always goes off on their own and only does things, quote, because it's what their character would do. I feel like that excuse is a breakdown of the metagame agreement that everybody had whenever we agreed that we are going to be playing this game together.
I think I'm generally less opposed to the going off on your own thing than you are, Clayton. I don't see it as a problem. As a player or as a DM, I think it's really just how you handle it. I've never quite grasped why you have such a problem with it, unless it's one of those things where it, really regularly excludes other players, or is like a spotlight hogging thing. I can get that. But it seems like you've got a much firmer stance on that. I don't know exactly where you sit on this issue, Kyle.
I'm more towards Clayton's side of things. There are some styles that just will. I mean, I guess styles of metagaming is a strange phrase, but it works. Just annoy the ever-loving shit out of me. If my character is going to do, that classic example of go off by himself, and I roll stealth successfully, and everyone else rolls perception and fails, and I am definitely going to be able to do this sneaky thing alone.
Mm-hmm.
And some motherfucker in the party just hounds and hounds and hounds and mistrusts my character for no goddamn reason. That's almost enough of a reason to make me quit a game if that person won't, quit that shit.
Wait, I'm confused. You took a turn there that I wasn't expecting. So do you consider going off on your own a problem for players or GMs, or do you just consider somebody hounding someone who's going off on their own for metagame reasons a problem?
The latter.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with that.
This is one of those things where, like I said earlier, that there's a spectrum here, and there is a certain amount of it that is actually good, like being able to go off on your own, and like being able to have a quick by yourself aside where you are able to be just a player and a GM and do something really quick. And I have been the victim of somebody hogging the spotlight by going off and doing their own thing so much that I have, and this is one of the problems that I recognize that I have and I'm trying to change, that I'm to the point where every time I see somebody do that, it brings back all of the bad instances where I had a player who literally went off on his own to fuck over the other players.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it was in a very real in-game sense. He was going off on his own to make plans that would fuck over the other players. And sometimes it was just going off on his own in order to just dominate the game and make as much of the game about him. And going off alone was a way for him to make the game all about him without having any of the other players around for them to even have the opportunity to join in the fun.
Mm-hmm.
Which is its own kind of metagaming in that regard. If you're doing that for out-of-game reasons, if you're doing that because it pisses someone off or because the players will try and stop you, I could see that as a type of metagaming as well.
I don't know that I even feel like players are obligated to be loyal to the party necessarily, and depending on the game and whatever kind of game people want to play. That's one of those things I think is totally up for grabs. But as far as like the actual getting a disproportionate amount of time of a slice of play over the course of a session, that's like a real world, faux pas that is a shitty thing to do. I've definitely done every single thing on this list at least once, and many of them multiple times. So I will definitely acknowledge that. But I don't know. I think there's some classes though that you kind of have to play as sort of lone wolves a lot of times in D&D for large chunks of the character for them to even work, and the mechanics kind of force that. The rogue's the most obvious. It happens with wizards a whole lot too. Rangers are often like this. But yeah, like if you always bunch up to, this Megazord cluster of a party and never go out and do your own thing, you've pretty much abandoned like half of what's cool about being a rogue. So I don't know. It's about not taking up an unfair slice of the time, I think, in my mind.
Yeah, and Jordan, you are right that I am way too harsh on players attempting to separate themselves from the main group and do something. I'm way too harsh. I'm way too restrictive on that. I would like to think that I've lessened a little bit over the past few years, but I mean, I feel like I have, but only you guys could tell me whether or not I've actually succeeded on that.
I don't know. I haven't pushed it in a while. We'll see. We just started a new game.
Eberron will be the perfect example for us to see how that goes.
Mm-hmm.
So we've kind of already started talking about hogging the spotlight in relation to the idea of metagaming. I want to kind of go back and just define that hogging the spotlight would be just making sure that, or taking up a disproportionate amount of time from, not necessarily the time, but the attention of the game master. One player in particular doing it more. I see that this is something that can be a problem whenever that player is not bringing other characters into the fun along with them. This is something I want to give props to for everybody who has been in our groups for the past few years, is that everybody has been really good about whenever you do something by yourself, you either have somebody else along with you, or it is something that is happening that is relevant to another player, and it is something that you then share with that other player and their character once either your mission is successful and you get, or well, either successful or a failure and you get back, or you find some way of relating it to the other players in the group in a way that really builds the story. I've also seen hogging the spotlight be a problem, like I've described, of player trying to just be the one to absolutely dominate everybody's attention at the table. Most often, I've been the game master whenever I've seen somebody really, really egregiously hogging the spotlight. But even as a player, another way I've seen that this happen is like one player giving a lot of advice to another player, to the point where that one player is basically attempting to control the other players at the table, or the other characters at the table, by constantly giving advice and giving suggestions about what the group thinks, or what the group next action would be, and being just domineering at the table while doing so.
Yeah, and it's even if they're like, there are ways to suggest actions for the group to do without being domineering, and you can even make those suggestions all the time. But a lot of that attitude, it goes hand in hand with someone who, when another player suggests an action or wants to do something, immediately that domineering player is the first one to shoot it down or make alterations or, critiques or whatever. And again, doing that constantly, that's when it just gets extremely aggravating.
Dude, am I a domineering player?
I would say no. And here's why. You do talk a lot as a player, but when you talk a lot, it's usually in the case of we have essentially a very passive group. Either the energy is down, or there's the other players aren't really engaging a whole lot in the game. And time and again, Jordan, I have seen you reach out and say things in character to the other characters at the table in order to bring them along with what you are doing. I don't feel like you do the hogging the spotlight. Kyle, I haven't noticed you doing it either. You both are really good about making sure that whenever you call attention to what you are doing, you're calling attention not only to you, but also you're spreading it out to other players.
It drives me crazy when there's no momentum in what the group's doing, and I'm constantly paranoid and trying to check myself about being domineering. That's why I ask. But sometimes I feel like if I don't speak up, we're gonna sit around and just kind of blandly discuss every option and never go anywhere because everyone's just given these like real soft little, mild suggestions about what to do, and no one's like, okay, let's do that, and without any assertion, you're not gonna get anywhere. It drives me nuts.
I think some of that might be, and this is a different topic, but endemic of our remote games. I've noticed that in the now two, and then I did a one-shot once, so I guess 3 remote games I've been a member of here in these trying times. It really seems to bring out that indecisiveness, and we talked about that before, but it seems to be worse in these remote games.
Yeah, the indecisiveness I know I am very, very guilty of. Like I am one of those players who I will continually come up with ideas and present them to the group, and I end up giving the group analysis paralysis because I give ideas, but I don't give any definitive, like, this is what we should do. This looks like the best course of action. I'll continually come up with new plans and not really commit to anyone. I feel like every group really does need to have somebody who is going to be the one to move things forward. And Jordan, that most often that is you.
I know.
And that's something that our group needs.
I get tired of playing squad leader though. I mean, it's fun sometimes, but like after pretty much years of having to fall into that role, I feel like it's either me or Kyle, one or the other, in every group. And sometimes I just want to play the dude that runs off on his own. That's like honestly my favorite shit. I don't play paladins, I don't want to be the fucking quarterback. Clayton, one thing that you do that I wish you would not do so much, that I think is an excess of goodwill or an attempt to be polite, is that you let every single other person in the group talk over you. You not only give everyone else lots of space to talk, which is great, but you also wait for a very long amount of time. Like, you have to have like 30 seconds of silence or something sometimes before you'll speak up with what you have to say. And I've seen multiple times in games where you're playing, where everybody else in the group will say stuff and take multiple turns at saying stuff, and you'll sit there quietly and maybe throw in something at the end. I wish you would speak up more.
I will try to do that. That is a personality flaw that I have in my real life that just carries over into the game.
And usually when you do speak up, it's like, okay, cool, yeah, that's a great point, let's do that thing. But in that Apocalyptia game, for sure, like, there's lots and lots of discussion. I'm like, God damn it. Okay, we need a team captain, somebody. I don't care who it is, but speak up, someone.
Well, I will try to do that because I'm pretty sure my character has the most leadership in the group. So
yep.
I'm telling you now, I will become the quarterback of the group, and I'll start trying to do that. I'll start trying to break out of my mold and break out of my rut starting tomorrow.
Thank you.
Sure. I'm starting to think we might not be able to talk about the GMing side of it in this episode, just because of the speed at which we're going through the player stuff.
Well, we could turn this into 2 episodes if you want.
Well, I mean, not the speed, but just how long, how much things we have to talk about the player side of it.
You guys talking about splitting this up?
Yeah.
I think there's no problem in doing 1 player and 1 GM episode of this.
Can we do power gaming?
I would love to.
Okay, because that kind of is part of metagaming in a way. But I think it's a special case of it.
Yeah, power gaming is this aspect of it is the one I grapple with the most. And I'm going to ask a legit question that I feel like I have this gut reaction whenever I ask this question that I know the answer, but whenever it comes to explain why I feel this way, I cannot do it. And that question is, what's wrong with power gaming? I have this gut reaction that, yeah, there's things wrong with power gaming. And those things, what are those things? Why is it so bad? I have this visceral reaction that I feel so anathema to it, but when I have to explain why, I can't do it.
Well, let's define what we're talking about. What is your definition of power gaming? Let's see if we can figure that out.
So my definition of power gaming is when a player, most often a player, uses the game rules in such a way that they exploit the rules for their own gain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what's wrong with that?
I feel like there is something wrong with it, but I couldn't tell you why.
Well, what do you mean by exploit? Because that word has that's loaded morally. So what do you mean by exploit?
By exploit, I mean taking an aspect of the rules and stretching it, bending it in such a way that it might not be in the spirit of the rules, but it is definitely within a strict interpretation of the rules.
Okay, give me an example that you found, objectionable.
Okay, in 3rd edition D&D, I had a player who was looking through the equipment list and saw, hey, slings don't weigh anything. I can carry an infinite number of slings, and I can just arm a militia wherever I go to help me with defeating whatever I need to fight.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the narrative of a story, the game master can come up with all kinds of reasons why a plan like that wouldn't work. One, there might not be enough people around to arm with slings in order to do that. There might not be people who are proficient with that, because back in 3rd edition, not every character was proficient with not even all simple weapons. Like, I want to say the base commoner only had proficiency in like 1 or 2 weapons. So in a story sense, you could explain that you just can't do that because there's not enough bodies to do it. But I feel like that's exploitative to be able to carry as many slings as you could possibly ever need.
How many slings was he carrying?
Hundreds. Something that legit is something that a person could literally carry 100 slings.
Sure.
Like my backpack could carry 100 slings.
Yeah, it wouldn't have 0 weight, but you could figure out, 10 slings weigh, 0.1 pounds or whatever, and work it out, scale it up to hundreds.
Well, here's the exploitative part of it. The core rules in the book said the sling didn't weigh, like it just had a dash for the weight of the sling.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't weigh anything.
Yeah. Well, of course it weighs something, so I would put some high cap on that by just, giving it a group weight quantity. I think ammo works like that, or in some things it does. But I think that's a pretty legit strategy, though. I mean, obviously you can't carry infinite ones, but like, if he can manage to rally a village together against some monster and hand them all slings and they all pick up rocks and go after it, like, the fucking Romans conquered the Western world largely with slings. So I don't see what the issue is with that. That sounds pretty legit.
I guess my issue with it was the intent of, oh, I see this exploit or this thing that I can take advantage of in the rules, and by the rules, there's not a damn thing you can do to stop me.
I mean, was he waving that in your face like some kind of Borat character? Like, you will never stop me, I have all the slings? Or did he do it because he thought it was smart,
It's entirely in the intent. And his intent was to get one over on the game master, which was me.
Okay, so, I mean, I think that's, you've got it right there. It's the intent. Obviously, if it's in good fun and you're, friends, or even if you're not friends, if it's something you can both laugh about, getting one over on your game master can be a great time. But if it's done maliciously, if it's done to begin some kind of bid for group domination, that's the intent there. I have a separate sort of example, but I won't go into that yet. We might talk about this a little more.
Yeah, I don't see anything inherently wrong with trying to get the most out of what the game mechanics have to offer you, and even taking like reasonable extrapolation on it. Like in history, the 14th century full plate harness is the power game of the 12th century, great helm. You've got one instance of a thing and think, man, this would be great if it was all over my body. Let's work that out. Okay, cool. Now we're gonna, tromp all over everything. Like, history's full of stuff like that, of, the arms race of figuring out, what the exploits are in the world. And the game rules are just the physics of your game. So I think that, yeah, if the intention's to be disruptive and be an asshole, then that's a problem with the person, not the problem with the tactics.
Yeah, and Jordan, I'm going to apologize for something that I do to you because of this bad experience that I've had. The way in which this player would sometimes lead into one of these exploits would be to start asking a series of questions that eventually led up to hopefully getting enough right answers that I can say this thing that's like an I gotcha type moment, where we would start asking like, so this, using the slings thing as an example, the slings, it says in here that there's just a dash in the player's handbook for how much they weigh, right? Yes, that's what it says. Okay, so I can carry a couple of slings and it's not considered it's not weighing me down. I don't have to add that to my character sheet. Right.
So you feel like you're getting painted in the corner.
Exactly.
When I'm, or that I'm forcing you to paint yourself in the corner, when I'm just asking a series of questions to build up like the logical framework for what I want to try. Exactly. You're immediately taking this as a fencing maneuver.
So exactly. Every time you've done that, I get a flashback to that other player, and I feel like, okay, is this what Jordan is trying to do? Is Jordan trying to get me to paint myself into a corner where I've said yes to all of these things, and now he's going to spring an I gotcha on me? Is that what he's going to do?
Clayton, if you ever need to talk about this stuff off the air, man, I'm here for you, bud.
Oh, dude.
I think it's a lot more helpful to other players if I talk about it on the air.
Mm-hmm. Man,
while we're on the topic, so when I was 7 years old, both of my parents told me that I would never amount to anything, and well, so we can talk about that later.
Hey, Clayton. I'm not trying to put baby in a corner here. It's all right. I'm just trying to figure out what I can do.
I think that's a really valid thing to fucking fear, though, especially if you've been in that situation.
Yeah, I get it. But yeah, that's
yeah, the upper brain or the upper parts of my brain can logically look at what you are saying and say, yeah, Jordan is just asking for clarification. He has a question about the rules, and he's wanting to make sure that he's understanding them clearly. But then in the reptile part of my brain, it's like, okay, he's needling me. He's trying to get me to say something that will give him something that he's going to use against me in the future.
I think a lot of the reason why I think about the game rules in this way is because it seems like fairly obvious that the rules are largely suggestions or hints at kind of an underlying framework or approach to representing what they want the game to be and what you can use them to make your game to be. And so in a well-designed system, there's a lot of cohesion, but there's no way that you're going to have a system that can accommodate every single edge case and, specific application. So when I'm asking these questions, a lot of times I'm like pointing to things that are those suggestions of how things are assumed to work, and then just trying to take that a step in a direction that the designers didn't, because it would be stupid to have a whole chapter on this particular use case that I just thought up. But it's establishing a precedence in the theme of how the designers handled, the most closely analogous things I can think of to what I'm going to try. And also, I'm not I don't want to come off as being, some kind of originalist, some constitutional interpretation of the Dungeons and Dragons rules. That's not really how I think about it, but I think it is important to maintain some kind of cohesion in the way the system works if you can.
Another symptom of this problem that I have is how at the beginning of a campaign, I always make sure I have all of the house rules ready and available for the players to look at and read, and make sure that they know exactly what I'm going to be bending the rules about, so that then alleviates me from later on down the line having to make a judgment call, because I feel as I'm sitting here discussing it, I feel like I'm doing that in order to avoid some sort of potential future conflict over an argument of how the rules work.
Yeah, you are by far the most litigious game master that I have ever played with by a damn sight. And it sounds like that's what you're doing. You're making a fortress of rules around yourself so that you don't have to make a ruling and piss anybody off and all that. I get it. That makes sense.
And that's not to say I'm not wrong. I take it too far. I really should learn how to not do it as much. And I really do want to trust my players, but I just can't.
I just wonder what, the worst case scenario is blowing up friendships, sure. Let's say that. But walking it back to something that's more likely to be the worst case scenario, the second worst case scenario, let's say, is what? A game that just gets, goofy and out of control and doesn't have any internal coherence and is just hand-wavy nonsense? Or what?
Yeah, that is also a fear that it'll just become getting me to say yes on a whole bunch of different things. It will be a slippery slope that just leads to me just being a game master who says, well, you asked me if you can grow wings and fly. I think so. Yeah, you can do that. That's this irrational fear, is that this will be a slippery slope that leads down to that.
To chaos. Sheer unbridled imagination.
I am going to break things off here. We record for another hour, continuing to talk about bad traits of players. So tune in next time for the conclusion of this topic. This has been a production of Alien Familiar Media. You can find past episodes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. This production is protected under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution, no derivatives license. Music for this episode is Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale and can be found at freemusicarchive.org.